Hi guys, welcome to my new channel. My name is Aliyah. I'm a fashion designer, and then yes, this is my first tutorial. So on today's tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to draft this beautiful waist corset. The steps are very easy and understandable, so I'll take you through each step from the pattern, from the drafting to the cutting to the sewing, everything. So this is very simple and easy to make. So I made this with Ankara print with cotton bias, pink cotton bias to match the fabric, and then I did loops at the back here, but you can go ahead and do the eyelet too. That one too is fine, but I prefer the loop when it comes to like the waist corset and all that. So let's get into the video. So these are the materials I'm gonna use in drafting the waist corset. First of all, we're gonna need to take our measurements. Well, I'm doing this waist corset for myself, so my bust is 35 divided by, my bust is 35, my waist is 28, my hip is 43, my shoulder to waist is 16, and then my shoulder to underbust is 13. So with this bust, we might not need it since it's a waist corset. It starts from the underbust, so it's just gonna help me draft the waist corset, but we don't need that side. I'll explain to you later. I'm sure I'm confusing you guys. All right, so the first calculation we're gonna do is the bust. I'm gonna divide it into two. You know, normally when it comes to drafting for like tops and other stuffs, we divide it into 4, but with this tutorial I'm only dividing it into 2, and then I'll explain why I'm doing that. So my 35 divided by 2 is 17 and a half. I'm using inches here. My waist is 28. 28 divided by 2 is 14. My hip is 43. Divided by 2 is 21 and a half. So my shoulder to waist, like I said, is 16. Shoulder to underbust is 13. Okay, so I'm doing a corset just like this, just like what I showed you here. So I'm gonna do a waist corset like this, just like the one I showed you before, like something like this, and I'll teach you how to achieve it. So okay, so let's start drafting. Yeah, before I forget, after you get your measurements like this, 17 and a half, you're gonna go ahead to deduct 3, deducted by 3, sorry. So 17.5 minus 3 will give you what? 14.5. And the waist, 14 minus 3 will give you 11. And then the hip, when it comes to the hip, I subtracted by 5 because I realized that when I input the measurement into the hip line, I realized it's too far from the waistline and I don't want it that pointy. So I'm gonna subtract the hip by 5 inches. So you can also go ahead and subtract these measurements by 2 or 2.5 instead of 3, depending on the distance between the center back. Okay, so I went ahead to first draw, come down 1 inch from here, from the selvage. So I came down 1 inch, and then that's my bust measurement here. Since I don't need the shoulder or the neckline or anything, it's just an underbust corset, so I'm just going to start from the bust line. So I came down 1 inch here, then I drew a line with my ruler, and then from here, since my shoulder to waist is my shoulder to bust is 10 inches, I'm just going to place the 10 inches here. So I'm placing the 10 inch on the bust line to guide me to get the rest of the measurement. My underbust is 13. My shoulder to underbust is 13. My shoulder to waist is 16. I forgot to mention that we will also need our shoulder to bust. That's the 10 inches for me. And then my waist to hip is 8 inches. from the waistline. So this is 24 here. So I'm just gonna go ahead to mark it and then draw it out. So yeah, sorry guys, my marker is kind of messing up. I think it's almost finished, and I hope you guys can see what I've done so far. So I'm just gonna go ahead to name it. This is my bust point. Like I said, we don't really need a side, that's why I've not used the marker to dip in it. And then this is my under bust, this is my waist, this is my hip line. So we're now going to input our measurements. This measurements we subtracted 3 from 17.5, subtracted 3 from the waist, and then from the 5 from the hip line. That's a measurement we're going to need to draft this. Okay, so yeah, so the reason why I divided it by 2 was because we're going to be drafting both the front and the back together, not just the front separately from the back, but the front and back together. That's why I divided it by 2 and not by 4. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and put our measurements. For the bust points, we have 17.5 minus 2, which is 14.5. So I'm just gonna put a 14.5 here. That's for the bust point. And for the waist, I have 11. Just gonna go ahead and put 11 on the waist. And for the hip line, I have 18.5. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put 18.5 here. Sorry, my table is a bit small. Okay, so the reason why I subtracted 2 more inches from the hip was because if I was gonna add 2 inches here, the distance between the waist and the hip would have been more, it would have come out more, which I didn't want. So that's why I subtracted it by 2. So yeah, it's still okay to do that. It won't affect your work. So I'm just gonna go ahead to join this bust to the waist and from the waist to the hip line like this. Okay. I realize that this part is too pointy, so we're just gonna try to blend it in a bit so that we don't have a too pointy edge like this. All right, this is fine. Okay, since I have my under bust measurements now, my waist and my hip, I don't need a top here. So whatever I'm gonna do next, I'm just gonna do it between the under bust to the hip line. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create star lines. So the star lines are just basically lines that you can decorate on the corsets. It could be straight, it could be diagonal, or anyhow you want your line to be. So I'll quickly show you how to do that. And then the lines.
For the lines, you can make it as many as possible. You can make it 3, 4, 5.
But for me, I'm gonna work with 4. So they're gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. And when I'm done cutting out, since this is just half, when I'm done joining the other half, it will become 8 pieces in total. So you can do it as much as you can, but don't do it too tiny. If not, the sewing is gonna be so hard for you. So I'm just gonna do mine 4. So yeah, this are my style lines I've created here. Like I said, mine is gonna be 4. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And by the time I'm done cutting it, I'll have 8 pieces in total, because this is the front and the back all together. So we're not done yet. We have to shape the corset a bit. So I'm gonna go half on my first star line on the under bust area, and then the waist area, and I'm gonna do that for all the other pieces. Half here, half here. Okay, so this is just to give shape to the corset here. So I'm just gonna connect it from the under bust to the waist all the way to the hip line like this, and for this side too. and then that side. So if you've done more than 4 star lines, or if you've done more than 3 star lines here, you can just go ahead and then subtract ½ inch from the waist and then from the underbust for all the star lines to give more shape to the waist corset. So when we're going to cut out, we will cut out the side. We'll cut the side out, sorry. We don't need it anymore. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to teach you guys how to shape your corsets because it's too long in length. This comes all the way from your underbust to your hip line, which is too long for me. So I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to reduce it, or how I'm going to create what I showed you guys earlier. This one. Yeah, so you see it's a bit smaller. So I'm just going to show you guys how I achieve that. Okay, so with the shaping, I came down the waistline by, this is like by 3. You can come down by 3, but I think mine is like 3.25. And then from the waist here going towards the hip line, I came down 4, and then here I came up 2 inches from the waistline going towards the underbust. So I'm just going to use my hip curve to connect the points together. So before you draw the lines, you have to fold in your darts like this, like the ½ inch we measured. You have to fold it in so that when you're done drawing your lines, it would all meet. When you cut it, it will all meet together. But if you do it on top of it like this, in the end when you cut it, this one might be longer than this one. This one too might be longer than. So it's very important to close the darts before drawing the lines. So I just placed my hip curve here, and then I drew the line from this point. Okay, so that's for the top, and for the bottom, we're just gonna join these 2 points together. Okay, so we're good to go. I'm okay with the way my waist corset is. You can make it a bit longer if you want to, or you can just maintain it like this. So it's gonna look something like this when you open it up. So I don't need this part anymore. So I'm gonna label my patterns 1, 2, 3, 4. So I prefer to cut out the whole thing. Then when I'm done sewing it on the Ankara fabric, I trim it out the way I want to, but sometimes you can just do it on the pattern before cutting out. Yeah. Okay, so I just went ahead to place some notches here to help or guide me when I'm sewing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut it out. But don't forget to label it first. This is your center front line. So when I'm cutting out my center front, I want a seam to be at this point. So I'm going to be adding half at the center front line. So I'm not going to cut it on fold. But if you choose to cut it on fold, it's fine too. But I'm not going to do mine like that. So I'm just going to separate this 1, 2, 3, 4 from each other. So I'm going to cut it like this. So after cutting our 4 pieces, this is how it's gonna look like. Like I said, we're gonna when we're done cutting it out, it's gonna be 8 pieces in total. So we're done with the drafting process. We're now gonna cut out these patterns. So the Ankara fabric I'll be using is this one, and I'll be pressing it with this stiff of vilene. This is hard, not extra hard. I got a hard one. You can also go ahead and then use the medium one. That one too is fine. I got my bias to match the Ankara fabric. but I didn't really like it that much because the yellow was too much in the fabric. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just be using the yellow. I would have gone in for an orange one or probably black or something, but I didn't have that on me. I mean, I don't have that on me right now, sorry. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a yellow bias. We're good to go. So guys, I've placed my pattern on my anchor, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add allowance to the top, to the bottom, and to the sides. Like I said, my center front is not going to be on fold, so I'm gonna go ahead and add ½ inch. That's the measurement I'll be using for the allowance, ½ inch. I like using this chalk because it's a vanishing chalk. When you use it on your fabric and then you go ahead to iron it, it vanishes. Like literally guys, it vanishes. So I really enjoy using it. It doesn't leave any stain on my fabric. Okay, so I'm done adding the seam allowances. You can also save a lot of time by just adding the seam allowance on your paper. After you're done cutting these pieces, you can go ahead and transfer it onto another paper and then add all the allowances you need to add before cutting it out on the fabric. Yeah. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut it out. So I'm going to cut all this again because I want to use the same fabric for my facing, for the inner. So I'm just going to go ahead and then cut the same pattern on top here again. So instead of 2 each, I have 4 each. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead to cut it out. Alright, so I'm done cutting my 4 pieces. And this is how it's going to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and then press my stiff on it. And then I'll be right back. Okay, so before I take them out, I just want to snip my notches a bit. Because with this pattern, it kind of looks similar, especially the first and the second one. So if you don't snip it, it can confuse you when you remove the pins. When you're snipping it, don't snip it in too much. You can just snip about 1/4, since we've added ½ inch of an allowance. Sorry. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and take it out. Okay, it's time for ironing. So I'm gonna iron the first piece. Like I said, I'm just gonna remove the first 2, then press it. So you don't need to press all the 4 because one is gonna be the main fabric, and then the other is gonna be the facing. Okay, so this is it. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a press. I know a lot of you guys cut out the stuff before ironing them together. I prefer this method because it doesn't waste a lot of time, because when you just take it like this, you can easily just trim out the shape you want. It saves a lot of time. Okay, so this is how it's gonna look like. Just gonna go ahead and then cut it out. Really have to take your time and then cut it out. If not, you may cut into the fabric. Okay, so I'm done with the first pattern. I'm gonna go ahead to do that for the rest of the pattern. So I'm done pressing it. I'm just gonna pin all the sides together from the first piece to the last piece like this. Make sure that the notches you snipped earlier matches each other. Okay, so I'm done pinning all these pieces together. So this is my facing here. It's gonna be inside, and then this is my main fabric. Yeah, so if you're gonna work with the medium size stiff of vilene, you can you have to press it on this facing, which is going to go inside, and then the main fabric, since it's a medium. But if you're using the very hard one, you can just go ahead and then press it on just the facing. Yeah, so I'm just gonna go ahead and then sew all the seams together. When I'm done, I'll come and then press them. I'm done sewing all the seams. So the next step is pressing and opening the seams like this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to this one too. Okay, so we're done pressing it. So what we're going to do is that we're going to put this aside, and then we're going to work with this one. This is the main fabric. This is a side that is going to show outward, and then this one will go inside. In the beginning of the video, I told you guys I was going to use a yellow bias because that was the only one I had, but I later found this black one that I prefer to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it on the seams like this line here. Okay, then I'm going to pin it like so. Make sure that it's sitting in the middle of the seam. Okay, so just like this. I hope you guys can see it. So we're gonna go ahead and do that for the rest of the seams, all showing all these lines you see here. So I'm done pinning it, guys. I'm gonna go to the machine and then stitch it side by side. Well, it depends on how wide your bone is. Let's talk about the boning. So you can decide to insert this ridgeline bone inside. For me, I prefer working with plastic boning a lot, way more than the ridgeline boning. Well, it depends on the style though, but I do work with this bone a lot. So I'm going to be using this bone for this tutorial. But make sure that the plastic bone is not wider than the bias, the measurement of the bias you're using for the corsets. Yeah, because some bias are wider and some bones too are wider than this. So yeah, so just make sure that it will be able to go into the bias after you're done stitching it. So I'm going to go ahead to the machine then and stitch it, and I'll be right back to show you how to insert the boning into the bias. So I'm done stitching the bias. Look at how neat and nice it looks. And I forgot to mention, before inserting the boning, I'm going to join the top of the facing to the top of the main fabric like this. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it 1/2 inch just at the top to avoid the bone from coming out to the other side all the way to the top. So I'm quickly gonna just join it and then go and sew it before inserting the bone inside. Make sure the seams meet.
So I'll be ending this video here. Watch out for part 2 on my channel.